Well, with the surprise Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom coming out around the time this video comes out, I thought it would be a good time to do a challenge run themed around Echoes of Wisdom, and instead of Link saving the princess from oversized pigs as usual, this time Zelda does all the heavy lifting for the first time in like 30 years. So today we will attempt to beat Skyrim as Princess Zelda. So for the rules of the run, since we are basing our character off of her newest installment, I thought to impose some fun rules for this challenge. The main rule for combat is that I'm only allowed to use non-damaging staves. No staves that do damage, and in fact with one exclusion, I'm not allowed to do any direct damage, and since Zelda can summon mobs from thin air or stunning enemies, the staves I'm going to be allowing myself are going to be the summoning staves, necromancy staves, and paralysis staves. And sure, there's a couple other staves around, but they're just walking sticks for the most part. Also, I cannot use any brawn, and instead I have to use my spherical brain to solve my problems, to show my wisdom, which is the gimmick of Echoes, I guess. As for the other rules, I have a dumb rule where the only clothing I can wear are robes or robe-like clothing. No gloves or gauntlets, circlets for my headwear, and non-armor boots. So I'm not going to be having a lot of defense this run, but I am familiar with those restrictions. As for spells, the only spell I can use is telekinesis. Why that spell?
At all though.
Well, with all that out of the way, let's begin the run. So in building my character today, I went with the Wood Elf, the closest race to the Hylian after all, and I tried to make my character as close to Her Highness as I can, but I suck at character creators. Her eyes might look a little bloodshot, but after being kidnapped in some form or another, however many games we are on now, I too would be stressed beyond all hell. Anyways, we almost get a game over right off the bat, but Argrok saves the day. That or Ganon grew wings, who knows. Anyways, for the introduction, I fly on past the burning part inside with Hadvar, mostly so I can speed up the opening. I don't need the heavy armor this run. There really wasn't much going on in the keep, just ignoring everyone until I make my escape out of the sewers. This time we don't end up in a church, but rather outside. I run on down the path a bit, grabbing myself some robes to somewhat look the part, then grabbing the Mage's Stone, which really doesn't serve much of a purpose, but oh well. So my game plan for right now is to grab some staves, and there are 3 I have in mind, and all 3 are actually really good staves, and they're also static spawns in the world, so we'll be grabbing them throughout the setup part of the run. The main problem though is that they can be a pain in the butt to get, so ideally I want to get a summoning staff first to mitigate some of the difficulty. I sell off what I can and then start diving through the litter boxes for some rupees, but more importantly soul gems, going to be invaluable throughout the entire run given how my previous staff runs went. Plus I don't have a good way to level up the related skill trees to decrease their charge cost. Well, in the process I didn't find any staves, so time to see if anyone has some for sale. I decided at this point to give the court wizards a go, see if anyone had any rods of wisdom. I visited a few wizards. It seems staves are very hard to come by. I only saw 2 staves in my travel, one in Mistveiled Keep. Sadly, ice staves are out of the question. The only staff I saw was at the Blue Palace, and that was a mage light, so now I can light up the darkness. Oh yay. Also in my travels I couldn't prevent a murder in broad daylight, but at least I got some nicer clothing in the process. Next up in my travels I went to Winterhold to see if I could get into the college to buy off from one of the merchants there. However, I cannot be allowed to cross the bridge because I don't have any charisma, so that plan is on hold. So yeah, nothing conjuration related for the time being, and at this point I'm starting to get a little desperate. Alright, enough fluffing around, time to pull out my trump card and start working on my other trump card. So at this point I returned to Helgen and began hiking my way to Ivarstead. Not so much to start climbing up to a frost troll, but rather wanting something from a cave a little bit further on to the east. Nothing to note heading into the cave except some vigilance hovering over a dead vampire. When I got to Ivarstead, I randomly decided to put my cave dive plan on pause, because there is another staff that will help out a bit more beforehand. I then returned to Whiterun to travel to Morthal. You know, it's kind of funny how I've already visited every town you need to for the main story. What I am after is inside a burrow literally southeast of the town, around the mountain, where on a corpse you can find an upgraded staff of Revenant so I can resurrect a dead body up to level 9. Nowhere near as powerful as a spell counterpart, same can be said about all the staves mind you, but it will help out in the short to medium term at least. While I was in Morthal, I decided to give Falion a visit. You see, down the road I am going to need to hit level 14 because I plan on going for the Sanguine Rose. For one, to fill my quota for the Daedric artifact usage, but also it is a very powerful summon that I feel will be very helpful for Alduin later down the line. I do some training, do the vendor buyback glitch for speech levels, and repeat. I don't go too much in depth. I like to free level up heal at a moment's notice after all, and plus I want to come back when I'm a bit, richer. So with the distraction out of the way, I return to Ivarstead. From Ivarstead I swam across Lake not quite highly to Nilheim, then down the path a bit until I hit Snap Lake Cave. It's a very short dungeon, I just have a lot of Screevers in the first room to deal with, but I resurrected a deer to distract them. The real eye of the prize is in a staff of paralysis in a room with a witch. This little staff is going to be my bread and butter for most of the run. Now comes the fun part. getting out of the cave because I might have gotten turned around at one point. Funny how I always get turned around. So with my prep work done for now, I thought now is a good time to clear out Bleak Falls Barrow and use my game knowledge to good use. Climbing up to the dungeon, I just avoided the bandits in the tower, and for the main entrance, I climbed up the mountainside and snuck in around the side. As for the first room, I just booked it past the first set of bandits and watched an outlaw suffer a heart attack. I resurrected him to help out with the rats further on down. As for the frostbite spider, I just paralyzed it and continued on my way. Also, totally didn't forget about Arvo. Further on in, I had a lot of Draugr who were eager to get a right slicing up. As for the remainder of the first section, I just sprinted past everyone and entered the second part. Having done this dungeon on Pacifist Legendary before, I sort of know what I'm doing. In the second part, I once again let the skeletons get chopped up, and at this point I remember that Arvel exists and need to backtrack to him. My memory is starting to get a little concerning. Also on my way back through the dungeon, I continued to let the bodies hit the floor. Once the re-deads were re-dead, I found Arvel taking a nap with some Draugr, then I re-backtracked my way through the dungeon. As a reminder, never forget about your small keys. Before the Overlord, I brought along a Draugr to try to do some chip damage. Also, he wants to get ready for his fighting game appearance. Before waking the Overlord from nap time, I did find a very cute staff in the chest. Sadly, it does damage, so I can't use it. So for the fight, I tried to have my little Draugr do some damage, but his little bony fingers weren't doing much. So now I'm bringing along the Overlord through the dungeon towards the blade traps. But using my lack of wisdom, I waited for him to walk under some lantern traps, then dropping them on him. Took 2 blasts but went down easily enough. With my stone in hand, I returned to Dragon's Reach to talk to the Jarl about my near miss with the Lizalfos, then enchanting some clothing for most of the run. I get my mission from the Jarl, and now it's dragon booping time. So as for the Volvagia fight, I just hung out from afar to avoid taking damage, and since I am squishy and I can't do much in the first place, I just hang out around cover. Once one of the guards dropped down, I used my fairy on him to bring him back to the fight. Didn't last long, mind you. But with as much help as I have with the fight, the dragon goes down and I'm back to Whiterun to tell the Jarl the good news. Next up is Everstead. Want to get through half of the game before I get my best echo. So for climbing up the steps, I decided to be nice and talk to Klimek about supplies since I've forgotten the Golden Claw, and I'll forget about it for the rest of the run. I thought I was just going to bring down just a wolf, but it turned into a big bear and brought it into town. Nearly took down Klimek, but with enough prison shanks, the Ursa is now minor. As for the rest of the climb, it was more or less wolfos biting away at me when I brought to a hunter nearby. Further up the mountain is the Frost Troll. I did not want to play today, so I paralyzed it and booked it on past. By the way, I also remembered about supplies for some easy rupees. I am not really a fan of the Greybeard's test, but I decided to have some fun with Whirlwind Sprint. You know how Wolfgar utilizes Whirlwind Sprint to demonstrate the power of the shout? Well, I got behind him, took several attempts, but on a couple of attempts I paralyzed him while dashing and he just ate snow. Thankfully, the rest of the beards forgave my mischief. Once that was done, I returned to Windhelm for more comedy. So my game plan was to troll the cultists here and letting the guards clean up my nonsense. Well, they are not very good at their job. Eventually I led them into the palace where one of the guards did their job. You know, if there are a lot of fireballs flying at the Jarl, I would, I don't know, do something. Plus mages love holding up boards, so that was very annoying with my paralysis spells. Eventually I led the cultists back outside, and the guards could cut them down to size and finally do their jobs. So next up is the Draugr-filled Usengraw, but before entering I wanted to clear out the bandit party that's hanging out outside. Well, the Necromancer anyways, once you kill her, everyone else dies. Just so that way I don't get ambushed later after I finish the dungeon. I decided to lead the raiding party into another raiding party, so I had to book it away, and everyone was hot on my trail. Thankfully up the road a little bit is a Stormcloak camp. However, bandits weren't really keen on getting close. Eventually the Necromancer was alone, so I zapped her into a log, and I saw her health depleting on the UI. Turns out one of the soldiers wanted in on the action. Well, I guess now is a good time to enter the dungeon. So for the first room, I had some AI bullcrap because I was sneaking, yet they were able to hold up a ward to block my paralysis spell. Rude. Also, I couldn't just duck walk my way past. So my goal was to let the bandits fight bandits, but everyone was stuck on a fallen pillar, so that made things awkward. Eventually I led them down to the Draugr part, and started to rise some conjurers that were dueling, just so I had some cover fire in the process. Eventually the Draugr do come out on top, but with enough distractions the Necromancers and Draugr forces settle their differences, and I could book it on past. As for the second part, I do my usual small skip and then descend to the bottom to get my Become Ethereal shout, which I'll be using extensively for the rest of the run. You might argue it is a spell, and I counter-argue that I am just using the Cane of Burna or the Magic Cape in an indirect way. Anyways, I do get close to death near the end because I'm fisting webs pretty slowly and Arachnagoma is getting too close for comfort. I was able to close the door, found out my Princess Horn is in another castle, then I left the dungeon. Back in Riverwood, I talked to Delphine about bombing some Dodongos, but before then, I go restock on potions, and not to flex or anything, but I never needed to use any more potions for the rest of the run. I also did the vendor exploit glitch for more levels, because I'm going to want to hit the level 14 threshold pretty soon, to be exact before the embassy. At Kynes Grove, I climbed the mountainside, tried to resurrect the dead guards that are here, but turns out they're a little too high leveled. Oh well, I have 3 backup plans in mind. So for Salakanir, I decided I have a new way to pacifist this fight. If I can't use my brawn, I will use my brain. And by that, I mean I will lead the dragon to a town dedicated to brawn. I made sure to boop the dragon with a paralysis spell to aggro it, and I wanted to lead it away to the nearby orc camp, but Delphine decided for once in her life to show up on time and started the fight. And she did an alright job, but the heat was too much for her and she went down for a breather. So now I can begin to lead the dragon to the stronghold. Except during the trip over, I angered a pack of wolfos so I had to contend with them on the side. Plus, I can't slash their backs and be done with it. I also went towards the wrong side of the stronghold, but some orcs were pelting the dragon with balls of fire anyways. It did get a little dicey, the ice breath was getting past the trees, but eventually the orcs came out on top, and I can get some answers from Delphine, including a harebrained idea. But since I don't have any cheese strats for the embassy, no perks in pickpocketing after all, I think now is a good time to get started on a rose. In my prep work for the late game, I enchanted some stuff for levels mostly, and Farngar gives me a book. Might be very useful later on. I then returned to Morthal to talk to Felion on conjuration training, using the exploit for speech levels and not stopping until he hit level 14. During the process, Felion did flex his calf muscles. I guess doing late night rituals does that. With all my leveling done, I do a pub crawl across the entirety of Skyrim's taverns until I find Sam Gavin and have a drinking contest with him. While Sam is standing on a chair while drinking, flexing his superiority, but oh well. I'm a very lightweight and passed out after 3 drinks. I then wake up with the Hangover Part 1, and I have to clean up the place since I was sorta drunk out of my mind, and we are backtracking away across the entirety of Skyrim. Next up is going to be Rorikstead, which is very far away from all my locations I have, so I have to hike it there starting at Morthal. Might have been smart if I had a Pona by my side, but I'm not super wise, okay? Along my travels, I did have a dragon ambush me, but thankfully it does have a tension issue, so I was able to sneak away. Very relatable to be honest, and plus I have an attempted bandit ambush, but because I knew they were there, I just vanished before their eyes and was able to sneak on away. Inside Rorikstead, I was fearing I would have to fetch a goat from a giant. I first tried to persuade nicely to the gentleman, and that did not work, so I brought out my Angie voice, and somehow it was enough to convince him to tell me about Whiterun's adventure, so I go and do just that. And then I do the exact same thing to Isolde. She gets angry that I'm not nice to her when sober. Well, excuse me, princess, I'm trying to get me a staff to save the world. Last up on this wild goose chase is a fort just outside Windhelm. It is a big old fort full of mages, and frankly I didn't give a damn. I literally sprinted past everyone here and booked it inside. And as for the interior, it was a very quick jog to the portal. Inside this funky dream world, I meet Sanguivine, who is actually Sanguine. He tells me it is dangerous to go alone and gives me his rose. Basically, his staff of conjured or moral lord, which is really good. I warp back to Whiterun and now I can get the ball rolling on the late game. But first, I get to test out my new toy. I traveled south to Dawnstar for a bit, wanted to get me some defenses going, so I go for my good old crutch, and I decided to test out my new toy on some giants. Sure, the Domora does do some damage, but it can't take much in turn. I did make a giant fall over in the process, but since my Domora goes down in a couple hits, I bail out of there. I traveled to the Vigilance HQ and seems I'm a little late to the calling. Oh well, I grab some supplies, then climb up further to the Lordstone. I have a bout with the Frosty Wolf foes, and at least a Domora can handle that. I complete the shrine and get my Lord Vessel in return, so at this point I decided to have some fun. First stop on my journey south is stopping at Witchmist Grove to meet my wife. She doesn't even acknowledge my presence, so I let my Moblin shop Mora down to size, and I get my ring back. Not quite the overpowered oracle rings you can get, but money is money. I do check out the wedding present chest, and it seems a Dare left a present. How lovely. Well, since I can't fast travel out of here, I continue my way south, and for the most part, nothing to note happened except for a terrible Yiga assassin. I let him try to attack me, but I used my runic powers to stop him in place, and funnily enough, I never even bothered to wipe out the Dark Brotherhood this playthrough. I must be getting soft. Further on south past Shorestone, I wandered through the forest, thinning out the troll population as I went. Some were wonderful dancers, and others just flopped around. Anyways, the reason I came all this way down here is to head into the Redwater Den. I didn't have much to do here to begin with, just going to the prison part and grabbing an alteration skill book. To be exact, telekinesis. Sure, I might have gotten to use the alteration to level up instead of conjuration, but oh well, to be honest, I forgot about the book until now. I just opened the way, letting my Dromora play with his new chew toys, then I left the dungeon. Once the outside guards were cleaned up, I returned to Riverwood to continue the main story. Before departing for the Thalmor Embassy, I spent some time restocking on soul gems to keep my paralysis staff in top shape. Once I was content, I entered the Winking Skeever and stole a sweet roll because I was thinking at first of using that for endgame, but I had other plans in mind. I unloaded my stock to Melbourne, then rode to the embassy. The party clothes do fit my character just fine. Once I had my stuff back, I let loose my little pet in crowded rooms, and thankfully it gets results. I let my Dromora tackle a Thalmor, then paralyze any adds so the fights are more 1v1s. Once the upstairs Thalmor was cleaved, I took the lesser known backdoor out of the first part. Outside, I did have to use my Sanguine Rose a little more often, but by keeping one agent stun locked, we had little issue. For the inside, once again, I was basically keeping Relindle preoccupied with a Dromora cleaned house, rather easily might I add. As for the prison break, I did a little paralysis on one agent to make things a 2v1. With the odds in our favor, we were able to get out just fine and Melbourne was able to live for this encounter. I tried to kill the frost troll in the next room, but in the process the troll fell on top of Melbourne and he sadly died. So I brought him back to life, and in a spot of sadism I could wait an hour and then resurrect him. Over and over. Back in Riverwood, I relayed the information to Delphine, so next stop is the Ratways. But before then, I decided to pay Septimus a visit. Old men living in caves are a natural sight after all. The big dwarven construct behind him is a secret to everyone, so he gives me keys to Aftan to hopefully help with his research. On my way to the Ice Palace, I encountered a gang of Frostwrights and they managed to easily dispatch my Dromora, but I had some friends in the Imperials to help me out. Also in my arrogance, I decided to have some fun with giants and paralyzing them, but they sent my Dromora to the moon. Twice. Also getting to Aftan, I might have taken a wrong turn and had to climb the outside tower, but oh well. Inside the Ice Temple, I have been through this place so many times at this point, I don't fight things along the way and I just sprint past everything, using my Dromora as a distraction. At least it is nice to play a Zelda game for once where you only take a heart of damage instead of death when falling. Though the Falmer were not really playing nice today. But in the process, I decided to have my Dromora play with a Centurion, except the Dromora was more concerned with the Falmer than Koloktos. Must have forgotten his oversized weapons. I also had some fun with the duo at the end. As for Blackreach, I just sprinted on to the end. My Dromora struggles with group encounters as it is, so I just leave them all behind. I press some buttons and Hylia blesses me with a Triforce in the shape of a scroll. With that all done, I did return the Lexicon to Septimus to see if I could do his data quest, but I'm level 14 at this point and I don't ever level up again for the rest of the run, so that's something. Also, I had an encounter with Shivari, and I'll just play that out. While Skyrim tries to figure out Schrodinger's cat, I decided to play through the Ratways. Well, I put Xion down for a nap and sprinted on through the place, leading lowlifes into the lowlife den, and they get the prison shank treatment, then booked it right to Esbern. As for the chef down here,
You've killed me.
Good.
well, I hit his body on Esbern's bed to make it look like a heart attack or something. Just ignore the cut marks. Also, the Thalmor down here are really not playing nice. An Ice Atronarch was a little too thick to get through the door and the agents were easily dispatched. At this point, I just booked it right through the Warrants part and the Thalmor followed us into the flagon, grouped up in one spot and they were easily wiped out, and then we made it back outside. Thankfully, the game was able to find an outside observer, and I can return Esbern to Delphine and we wandered towards Skyhaven Temple. Since I have marked Rorikstead on the map already, I traveled there and the pig with wings was waking up another friend from their dirt nap, and with the help of Esbern we were able to put him right back to bed, but not before turning my pet into a chew toy. Further on west, we came across a vampire lair. Honestly, I forget this place exists. One of the vampires randomly hit very hard and went back to weak mode right afterwards. Before long, my Dromora was able to cut them down to size, and further on west, I came across a sinkhole mining community, and they were having a Draugr problem, and I decided, why not, I'm in the area, I could clean it out. Thankfully, most of the Draugr here were of the weak variety. Just once I fell into the main part, there were a lot more stronger variants around, and my Dromora was too honorable to attack a paralyzed target. As for the boss room, seems my leveling finally caught up with me and it was a White Lord. While the gimmick of the fight, besides the annoying ass disarm the higher level Draugrs love to use, is that there are two pillars guarding him. One fires balls at you and the other one heals the Lord. Oh well, once the Draugr lost its footing, it was good as done and we could get our rupees for our troubles. Further on down the way is a big old Forsworn battle with a Blood Dragon, but my Dromora is able to split up the forces. I spent a lot of time on the outside cleaning out the Forsworn, had to summon a lot of Dromora in the process, and in the battle Skyrim decides to go on holiday and just break. I mean, it is Skyrim, it is to be expected. Too bad I can't swim up it to the Sky Islands. As for Carspire, Delphine and Esbern finally came back so we can mop up the remaining Forsworn down here with ease. At this point, time to start wrapping up the playthrough. We solved simple puzzles, so simple no jingle plays in the meantime, then temporarily lose sword beam capabilities thanks to a knife, learn our necessary information, and then return to the Greybeards to get yelled at. But before learning my shout that lets me climb to Mount Lanayru, I was attacked by a bunch of hired thugs, all because I stole a sweet roll. Man, they really take sweet roll theft in Skyrim very seriously. Well, don't mess with the Greybeards or you'll learn the Ballad of Fire and Ice. After that fiasco, I learned the Song of Unstorms, then climbed to the throat of the world, and activated my Triforce to gain the ability to bind Ganon's dragon form. So for the first Alduin fight, it was not all that bad for me. For my Dremora friend, not so much. Really, for the entire fight, I can't do anything, none of my stabs work on him, and I don't have any magicka for alteration anyways. It was pretty straightforward, all things considered. Hide behind rocks, bring out my Dremora friend, and whenever he went down, bring out another one. All I had to worry about were the bloody meteor attacks. Things went by so much faster once Alduin stopped focusing on the chew toy, but rather party snacks. And once that happened, the fight was good as done, and I can begin endgame. Also, when I tried to talk to my divine dragon, he took off whenever a meteor bonked him on the head. So next step is preparing before the final fight by bringing together friends from all over. When I talked to Argnir, he was hanging out on the tower. This is actually the first time I ever saw him up there. Once I got my information from him, I brought up my Staff of Paralysis and had some fun with him, eventually knocking him off the tower. I love toying around with the Greybeards, so next up is the Peace Council. Yeah, I hate this quest. So for getting to Skuldolphin, I can't really grow wings, so instead I lure a dragon into a trap and borrow their wings instead. So for Skuldolphin, much like frankly a vast majority of my runs, I don't bother fighting things here. I tried luring some Draugr into a dart trap, but they weren't really fazed by it, so I brought out my Stabby Boy. And for the most part, I just use him to distract the enemy so I can get on past the obstacles and puzzle solving. It is nice to have something to take the heat off of you. As for the Draugr Overlord near the end, I was planning on luring it into a trap, but Draugr already triggered it, so I have to let my demons take care of things. As for the Priest, I distinctly remember it stealing my data and using it against me during the Ant Run, so instead I ignored it and booked it into the portal. So before the final battle, we have to make it past a major test of strength soon. I don't fancy getting chopped into 4 swords, so I let my data take the axe wings. And I went through quite a few until he had enough, and I can claim my spirits to help carry me for the final battle. We yell away at the fog 3 times, that's the role of Zelda after all, and the dragon comes down for the fight. So for this battle I didn't intentionally bring along soon, he just came along naturally. And in fact this was the fastest Alduin fight I've had in quite a while. Took about 45 seconds outside of menus to bring him down to low health. In fact, the hardest part of this battle is lining up my book because meteors kept knocking them away from me, but eventually everything behaved. I threw the book at the Ganon dragon, causing it to be sealed and blowing up in the process. Skyroll is saved and successfully beaten Skyrim as Zelda. Was the telekinesis exception just for Alduin? Yeah, but overall the run was extremely enjoyable, mostly for the early game when I had to actually get my weaponry. And also Bleak Falls Sparrow made early game pacifism possible, later dungeons like the Thalmor not so much. Sure, the Staff of Revenants had its usage, but the Staff of Paralysis was just so helpful throughout the entire run. The ability to take an enemy or 3 out of the combat for a little bit helped out quite a lot. And then there is the Dremora itself. Sure, it does hit somewhat hard, but given its limited range capabilities, it sure had its cons. But given how other summoning staves are locked behind content, in fact I don't think I could even get into the college unless I somehow passed a very hard speech check, so that was out of the picture. But overall I had fun, though I think for my next Skyrim run I have a tournament result to play as. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm off to play some Echoes of Wisdom. Well, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give a like, subscribe for more masochism and any other ways to torture myself, be sure to leave it in a comment below. This has been Orpheolus, and see you all in the next one.